My brother's wife poisoned my grandma with insulin for $4 million inheritance. I'm ICU nurse who caught her and destroyed her life. My sister-in-law, Melissa, poisoned my 94-year-old grandmother with insulin injections to speed up her death and get a $4 million inheritance faster. I watched Grandma Rose decline rapidly over 6 weeks, experiencing hypoglycemic episodes that doctors couldn't explain, confusion and weakness that seemed to come out of nowhere, falling into unconscious states that required emergency intervention. The doctors were baffled because Grandma wasn't diabetic. She had no medical reason to have dangerously low blood sugar. They tested for insulinoma tumors and pancreatic disorders and found nothing. They couldn't figure out why this healthy 94-year-old woman was suddenly having life-threatening blood sugar crashes 3 or 4 times per week. I'm Sarah Chen, 38 years old, and I'm an intensive care nurse with 16 years of experience. I've seen thousands of patients. I've worked with poisoning cases. I know what medical murder looks like, and I knew someone was giving Grandma Rose insulin to kill her. When I accused my sister-in-law, Melissa, she laughed in my face and said, "Your grandmother is 94, Sarah. Old people decline and die. It's called nature. Maybe you should accept reality instead of inventing crazy conspiracy theories. You sound paranoid and honestly a little unhinged." She thought I was just an emotional granddaughter, grasping at straws. She thought she'd gotten away with the perfect murder because insulin is almost impossible to detect, and because everyone expects 94-year-olds to die. She forgot I'm an ICU nurse who specializes in critical care and toxicology. I know exactly how insulin poisoning works. I know how to test for it. I know how to catch medical murderers, and I know how to build evidence that will stand up in court. This is the story of how my brother's wife systematically poisoned my beloved grandmother to inherit money faster, and how I used my medical expertise to catch her, expose her, send her to prison for 25 years, and make sure she never gets 1 penny of that inheritance. My grandmother, Rose Chen, was the strongest person I've ever known. She immigrated to America from Taiwan in 1962 with $20 in her pocket and no English skills. She worked as a seamstress in a garment factory in San Francisco's Chinatown for 40 years. She saved every penny. She invested in real estate starting in the 1970s when property was affordable. She built a portfolio of rental properties across the Bay Area. By the time she retired in 2002, she owned 7 properties worth collectively about $4 million. Grandma Rose was my hero. She raised 4 children as a single mother. After my grandfather died young, she put all 4 kids through college, working double shifts. She helped raise me and my brother Marcus after our mother died of cancer. When I was 12, she was the center of our family, the matriarch, the person who held everything together. At 94 years old in early 2024, Grandma Rose was remarkably healthy. She lived independently in her own house in Daly City. She cooked her own meals. She did her own shopping. She volunteered at the senior center twice a week. Her mind was sharp and her body was strong. Her doctor said she could easily live to be 100. Grandma had a will that split her estate equally among her 4 children, my father James, my uncle Robert, my aunt Linda, and my aunt Susan. Each would inherit approximately $1 million. It was a fair and simple distribution. My brother Marcus was 42 years old. He worked as a real estate agent. He'd always been financially irresponsible, spending more than he earned on cars and clothes and luxury items he couldn't afford. Marcus married Melissa in 2019. Melissa was 35. She worked in pharmaceutical sales. She was beautiful and charming, and everyone in the family loved her at first. I was cautious about her from the beginning because something about her felt calculated and cold beneath the surface charm, but I couldn't articulate why, so I kept my concerns to myself. In December 2023, Marcus and Melissa's financial situation became desperate. Marcus had made bad investments in cryptocurrency and lost $200,000. They had credit card debt of $85,000. They were 2 months months behind on their mortgage. They were facing foreclosure on their house. Melissa's job was commission-based, and her income had dropped significantly. They needed money immediately, or they'd lose everything. I learned later that Melissa had researched the family inheritance situation extensively. She knew that when Grandma died, Marcus would inherit approximately $250,000 as his share of his father's inheritance, which would be 1/4 of $1 million. That wasn't enough to solve their financial crisis. But Melissa discovered something interesting. If my father James died before Grandma Rose, then his inheritance would pass to his children, meaning Marcus and me. We'd each get $500,000 instead of Marcus getting $200,000 to $50,000 through our father. My father was 70 years old and healthy. Melissa couldn't realistically murder him without massive suspicion, but Grandma was 94. If Grandma died, people would assume natural causes. If Melissa could speed up Grandma's death, Marcus would get his inheritance sooner, and their financial crisis would be solved. What Melissa didn't factor in was that speeding up Grandma's death would leave evidence, and that Grandma's granddaughter was an ICU nurse who would recognize the signs. Grandma Rose's decline started in early January 2024. I visited Grandma every Sunday for lunch, which was our tradition for 20 years. On January 7th, I arrived at Grandma's house and found her confused and weak. She was sitting at the kitchen table looking disoriented. "Grandma, are you okay?" I asked, and she looked at me like she didn't recognize me for a moment. Then her eyes focused. "Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry, dear. I feel very strange today. Everything is fuzzy, and I can't seem to think clearly." I checked her immediately. Her skin was clammy and pale. Her hands were trembling. She was having difficulty forming complete sentences. These are classic signs of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. I tested her blood sugar with the glucometer I kept in my nursing bag. Her reading was 45, which is dangerously low. Normal blood sugar is 70 to 100. Below 55 can cause confusion and unconsciousness. Below 40 can cause seizures and death. I immediately gave Grandma orange juice and crackers to raise her blood sugar. Within 20 minutes, her reading was back to 78, and she felt normal again. "Grandma, you just had a hypoglycemic episode. Your blood sugar dropped dangerously low. Have you been eating regularly? Are you taking any new medications?" Grandma was confused. "I don't understand, Sarah. I'm not diabetic. I don't take insulin or diabetes medication. I ate breakfast this morning like always. Why would my blood sugar be low?" That was an excellent question. Non-diabetic people don't have random severe hypoglycemic episodes without cause. There are only a few medical explanations: pancreatic tumors that overproduce insulin, severe liver disease, certain rare hormone disorders, or external insulin administration, meaning someone gave her insulin. I took Grandma to her doctor the next day. Dr. Martinez ran comprehensive tests. Blood work showed normal pancreatic function, normal liver function, normal hormone levels, no tumors, no medical explanation for the hypoglycemia. "It's very unusual, Rose," Dr. Martinez said. "We'll monitor you closely, and if it happens again, we'll do more extensive testing." It happened again 4 days later. On January 11th, Melissa called me panicking. "Sarah, you need to come to Grandma's house right now. Something's wrong with her." I came over to check on her and found her passed out on the floor. I rushed to Grandma's house and found Melissa kneeling beside Grandma, who was unconscious on the living room floor. I checked Grandma's blood sugar immediately. It was 38, critically low. I gave her glucose gel under her tongue and called 911. The paramedics arrived and transported Grandma to the emergency room. They gave her IV dextrose and her blood sugar normalized. She woke up confused about what happened. The ER doctor was baffled. This is the second severe hypoglycemic episode in 4 days for a non-diabetic patient. We need to admit her for observation and comprehensive endocrine testing. Grandma spent 3 days in the hospital. They did every test imaginable: CT scans looking for pancreatic tumors, hormone panels, insulin and C-peptide levels. Everything came back normal. The endocrinologist, Dr. Patel said this is highly unusual. There's no medical explanation for these episodes. We'll need to monitor closely and consider rare conditions. Grandma was discharged with instructions to check her blood sugar multiple times daily and keep a food diary. I visited her every day that week to help monitor. Her blood sugar was normal and stable every single time I checked it. Then on January 22nd, it happened again. I got a call from Melissa at 3 p.m. Sarah, I'm at Grandma's house, and she's having another episode. She's conscious but very confused and weak. Can you come? I arrived within 20 minutes. Grandma's blood sugar was 42. I gave her juice and crackers. I asked Melissa what happened. Did you see anything unusual? Melissa's face was concerned and innocent. I just stopped by to visit and bring her groceries. I found her like this, sitting in her chair, barely able to talk. This keeps happening, Sarah. What if she has some terrible disease the doctors haven't found yet? I started thinking like an ICU nurse instead of a worried granddaughter. Hypoglycemia in non-diabetics is extremely rare. Having it happen 4 times in 2 weeks is virtually impossible. Without external cause, the most common cause of unexplained hypoglycemia is surreptitious insulin administration, meaning someone is secretly giving the person insulin. This happens in cases of medical murder or Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I'd seen 3 cases during my nursing career. I started monitoring Grandma even more closely. I installed a medication tracking app on my phone and documented every episode with times, blood sugar readings, circumstances, who was present, what Grandma had eaten. I was building a medical timeline. I noticed a pattern. Every single episode happened when Melissa had been visiting Grandma. Recently, January 7th. Melissa had been there that morning, January 11th. Melissa was the one who found Grandma unconscious. January 22nd. Melissa was present when the episode occurred. It could be coincidence, but my nursing instincts were screaming at me. I started asking questions. I called my brother Marcus. Has Melissa been visiting Grandma a lot lately? I don't remember her being so involved before. Marcus sounded pleased. Yeah, Melissa's been amazing. She goes to check on Grandma almost every day, brings her groceries, helps her with errands. She's really stepped up. I think she feels bad that we've been so stressed about money, and she wants to help the family however she can. That made no sense. Melissa had never been particularly close to Grandma Rose. She'd been polite at family gatherings but never went out of her way to help. Suddenly in January, she's visiting every day, right when Grandma starts having mysterious medical episodes. The timing was suspicious. I decided to test my theory. I installed a hidden camera in Grandma's living room. I told Grandma I was worried about her safety after the episodes, and I wanted to be able to check on her remotely. Grandma agreed, thinking it was for medical monitoring. I positioned the camera to show the full living room, including where Grandma usually sat. The camera had motion detection and cloud recording, so I could review footage from anywhere. 2 days later, on January 29th, I was at work at the hospital when my camera app alerted me to motion at Grandma's house. I pulled up the live feed and watched Melissa enter Grandma's house using the key she'd apparently been given. Grandma was in the kitchen making tea. Melissa called out, "Hello, Rose, it's just me, Melissa. I brought you some fresh bread from the bakery." I watched Melissa sit with Grandma at the kitchen table, chatting pleasantly for about 10 minutes. Then Melissa said she needed to use the bathroom and walked out of camera view. She was gone for maybe 3 minutes. When she returned, she sat down and continued chatting. After another 15 minutes, Melissa said she needed to leave and hugged Grandma goodbye. 30 minutes after Melissa left, I watched Grandma on the camera start to look confused and weak. She was exhibiting the exact signs of hypoglycemia I'd seen before. I called Grandma immediately. "Grandma, how are you feeling? I'm watching the camera and you look unwell." Grandma's voice was weak. "Sarah, I feel strange again. That fuzzy feeling is back. Everything seems far away." I told Grandma to check her blood sugar. She did and called me back. "It's 48, Sarah. It's happening again." I told her to drink juice immediately, and I'd call 911. Paramedics transported her to the ER again. This was the 5th episode in 3 weeks. I reviewed the camera footage obsessively, trying to figure out what Melissa had done during her visit. The bathroom break was suspicious, but I couldn't see what happened. During those 3 minutes out of camera view, I installed a second hidden camera in Grandma's bedroom and bathroom area to cover the blind spots. On February 4th, Melissa visited again. I was watching the live feed from work. This time, I watched her entire visit carefully. She chatted with Grandma for 10 minutes, then said, "I need to get something from my car," and walked outside. She returned 2 minutes later carrying her purse, which seemed odd because she'd brought her purse into the house originally. She sat down next to Grandma and continued chatting. After 5 more minutes, Melissa said she should go and left. I watched Grandma on camera for the next hour. Sure enough, 40 minutes after Melissa left, Grandma started showing signs of hypoglycemia, confusion, weakness, trembling. I called Grandma and confirmed her blood sugar was 44. The pattern was absolutely clear. Every time Melissa visited, Grandma had a hypoglycemic episode. Within an hour, Melissa was doing something during her visits that caused the episodes. The most logical explanation was that Melissa was secretly injecting Grandma with insulin, but I couldn't see it on camera. Melissa was being very careful. I needed to catch her in the act. I installed a third camera in Grandma's kitchen with a wide-angle view. I also installed a camera in the entrance hallway. Now I had coverage of almost the entire house. On February 10th, Melissa visited again. I watched on multiple camera feeds. This time I caught it. Melissa was sitting next to Grandma on the couch chatting. Grandma was drinking tea that Melissa had made for her. At one point, Grandma set her teacup down on the side table and turned to look at something Melissa was showing her on her phone. During that moment when Grandma was distracted, Melissa's hand moved to her purse beside her on the couch. She pulled something out quickly. It looked like a small syringe. She leaned toward Grandma and appeared to inject something into Grandma's upper arm through her sweater. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. Then Melissa put the syringe back in her purse. Grandma didn't seem to notice anything. They continued chatting normally. I'd watched Melissa inject my grandmother with what I was certain was insulin, but the video quality wasn't perfect because the camera was across the room. I could see the general motion, but I couldn't definitively prove it was a syringe or what was in it. I needed better evidence. I went to Grandma's house that evening. After Melissa had left, Grandma had experienced another hypoglycemic episode as expected. Her blood sugar had dropped to 41 about 50 minutes after Melissa's visit. I examined Grandma's arms carefully. On her left upper arm, I found a tiny puncture mark. It was recent, and in exactly the location where I had seen Melissa's hand move on the video. This was proof that Grandma had been injected with something. I told Grandma what I suspected. "Grandma, I need to tell you something serious and frightening. I believe Melissa is poisoning you with insulin injections to make you sick. That's why you're having these episodes. I have video footage, and I found an injection site on your arm." Grandma looked at me in horror. "Why would Melissa do that? That's insane, Sarah. Maybe you're mistaken. Maybe I scratched myself, and that's the mark. Melissa has been so kind visiting me every day." I showed Grandma the camera footage. We watched together as Melissa made the quick injection motion. While Grandma was distracted, Grandma started crying. "I can't believe this. Why would she want to hurt me? I've never done anything to her. This doesn't make sense." I explained gently that Melissa and Marcus were in severe financial trouble and they would inherit money when Grandma died. Melissa was trying to speed up Grandma's death to get the inheritance sooner. Grandma was devastated. "My own grandson's wife is trying to kill me for money. How can people be so evil?" I called my father immediately and told him everything. The pattern of visits, the camera footage, the injection mark, my medical assessment that Melissa was administering insulin. Dad was horrified and furious. "We need to call the police right now. This is attempted murder." I agreed, but I explained we needed stronger evidence. What I had was suggestive, but not definitive. A defense attorney could argue the video was unclear, that the mark on Grandma's arm could be from anything, that the correlation between visits and episodes was coincidence. I needed to catch Melissa with insulin in her possession, and I needed definitive medical proof that Grandma had external insulin in her system. I consulted with Dr. Martinez, Grandma's primary care physician. I explained my suspicions and evidence. Dr. Martinez took it seriously. Sarah, your observations are medically sound. Unexplained hypoglycemia plus injection marks plus temporal correlation with specific person's visits is highly suspicious for insulin poisoning. We need to test for it. I'll order a C-peptide test next time Rose has an episode. If someone is given her external insulin, the C-peptide will be low because her pancreas isn't producing the insulin. That's the definitive test. I also consulted with the hospital toxicologist, Dr. James Reeves, who I'd worked with on poisoning cases. I showed him all my evidence and medical timeline. Dr. Reeves agreed this looked like insulin poisoning. He explained that insulin has a very short half-life in the body and is difficult to detect unless you test during or immediately after an episode. He recommended testing grandma's blood for insulin and C-peptide during the next hypoglycemic episode. If insulin is high and C-peptide is low, that proves external insulin administration. On February 15th, Melissa visited Grandma again. I was off work that day and I was parked outside Grandma's house in my car watching the camera feeds on my phone. I watched Melissa enter the house. I watched her sit with Grandma and chat. I watched her make the quick injection motion when Grandma was distracted looking at something Melissa pointed to outside the window. It was the same technique as before, fast and subtle. Grandma didn't notice. Melissa left. After 20 minutes, I waited in my car, monitoring Grandma on camera. 35 minutes after Melissa left, I saw Grandma start to look confused and weak on camera. I immediately went into the house. Grandma's blood sugar was 39. I called 911, but before the ambulance arrived, I drew blood samples myself, using supplies from my nursing bag. I drew 3 vials of blood and immediately put them on ice. I told the paramedics I'd already drawn blood for testing and gave them the vials to transport with Grandma to the hospital. At the ER, I explained the situation to the attending physician. I'm an ICU nurse, and I believe my grandmother is being poisoned with insulin by a family member. We need to test these blood samples for insulin and C-peptide levels. This is her 6th severe hypoglycemic episode in 6 weeks, and she's not diabetic. I have evidence of foul play. The ER doctor ordered the tests immediately. Results came back 3 hours later. Insulin level was 89, which is very high. C-peptide level was 0.4, which is very low. This combination is diagnostic for external insulin administration. The endocrinologist, Dr. Patel, reviewed the results and confirmed these labs are definitive proof that someone gave your grandmother insulin. Her body didn't produce this insulin naturally. This is poisoning. I had the medical proof I needed. Now I needed to catch Melissa with the insulin. I contacted Detective Maria Santos with the San Francisco Police Department. I presented everything. The medical timeline showing 6 hypoglycemic episodes, all correlated with Melissa's visits. The camera footage showing suspicious injection motions. The injection mark I'd photographed on Grandma's arm. The lab results proving external insulin administration. My professional medical opinion as an ICU nurse that this was insulin poisoning. Detective Santos took the case seriously. This is attempted murder. We need to obtain a search warrant for Melissa's home and vehicle. If she's injecting your grandmother with insulin, she must be getting it from somewhere and storing it somewhere. Insulin requires refrigeration, so she likely has it at home. The police obtained a search warrant and executed it on February 18th. They searched Marcus and Melissa's home while Marcus was at work and Melissa was home alone. I wasn't present, but Detective Santos called me afterward. Sarah, we found it. Melissa had a small refrigerator in her home office that she claimed was for cosmetics. Inside, we found 6 vials of insulin, syringes, and alcohol wipes. She also had a detailed schedule written in a notebook showing dates and times of visits to your grandmother's house. Some entries said successful episode. Some said no episode, patient ate too much food. This is a murder log. We've arrested Melissa for attempted murder and elder abuse. Melissa was arrested at her home. Police found the insulin vials were prescription insulin prescribed to a patient named Margaret Foster. Investigation revealed that Margaret Foster was one of Melissa's pharmaceutical sales clients, a diabetic woman who Melissa had convinced to request extra insulin prescriptions, claiming there were supply shortages. Melissa had been collecting insulin from this patient over several months. This added prescription fraud to her charges. Melissa's attorney tried to claim the insulin was for personal use, and the notebook was unrelated, but the prosecutor destroyed that defense. Melissa wasn't diabetic. She had no legitimate reason to have insulin. The notebook directly correlated with dates Grandma had hypoglycemic episodes. The camera footage showed Melissa making injection motions. The medical evidence proved external insulin administration. The case was airtight. Marcus was devastated when he learned what Melissa had done. He immediately filed for divorce. He hadn't known about the insulin poisoning, but he'd known about their financial crisis. And he admitted Melissa had talked about how much easier their lives would be when Grandma died, and they inherited money. Marcus felt tremendous guilt for not recognizing Melissa's intentions. Melissa's trial was in June 2024. She was charged with 6 counts of attempted murder, 6 counts of elder abuse, prescription drug fraud, and assault. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. I testified for 8 hours explaining the medical timeline, the testing protocols, the camera footage, the lab results proving external insulin. I walked the jury through exactly how insulin poisoning works and why Grandma's episodes were impossible to explain naturally. Dr. Martinez testified, confirming the medical evidence. Dr. Patel, the endocrinologist, testified that the insulin and C-peptide levels were diagnostic for poisoning. Detective Santos testified about finding the insulin vials and the murder log notebook. Margaret Foster, the diabetic patient, testified that Melissa had manipulated her into getting extra insulin prescriptions. The camera footage was played, showing Melissa's injection motions. Melissa's defense was pathetic. Her attorney tried to argue that Melissa was trying to help Grandma by giving her insulin because she thought Grandma was diabetic and hiding it. The prosecutor annihilated this claim. Why would anyone secretly inject insulin without telling the patient or doctors? Why would Melissa have a notebook tracking successful episodes? Why would she continue after Grandma was hospitalized multiple times? This makes no sense. The defendant was poisoning Rose Chen to speed up her death and inherit money. Period. The jury saw through Melissa's lies completely. They deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all charges. Sentencing was in August 2024. Attempted murder in California carries 15 years to life. The judge was harsh. Ms. Melissa Rodriguez, you systematically poisoned a 94-year-old woman over 6 weeks, causing her to suffer 6 life-threatening hypoglycemic episodes. You did this for financial gain. You exploited your position as a trusted family member to access and poison the victim. You showed no remorse, and you lied throughout this trial. You represent a severe danger to society, particularly to vulnerable elderly people. I am sentencing you to 25 years to life in state prison. You will serve at minimum 25 years before being eligible for parole. Additionally, you are prohibited from ever serving as a caregiver, power of attorney, trustee, or executor for anyone, and you are ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution to Rose Chen for medical expenses and emotional damages. 25 years to life. Melissa was 36 years old. She'd be 61 at minimum before parole consideration. Her life was effectively over. The criminal conviction also meant Melissa could not inherit any money from Grandma Rose under California's Slayer statute. Criminals cannot profit from their crimes. When Grandma eventually does die, Marcus will still inherit his portion, but Melissa will get nothing. She destroyed her life and got zero financial benefit. Grandma Rose recovered fully from the poisoning. Once Melissa was arrested, the episode stopped immediately. Grandma never had another unexplained hypoglycemic episode. She's now 95 years old and doing well, still living independently, still volunteering, still sharp as ever. She tells everyone that her granddaughter Sarah saved her life. Marcus divorced Melissa and has slowly rebuilt his relationship with the family. He went to therapy to process the trauma of learning his wife tried to murder his grandmother. He's dating someone new who seems genuinely kind. Marcus still struggles financially, but he got a better job, and is slowly paying off his debts the legitimate way. I've become an advocate for elder abuse awareness. I give presentations at hospitals and senior centers, teaching people to recognize signs of medical poisoning. I explain what insulin poisoning looks like, how to document evidence, how to work with police and doctors. I've helped identify 3 more potential insulin poisoning cases in my hospital since Grandma's case. All are under investigation. Melissa is currently incarcerated at Central California Women's Facility, serving year 1 of her minimum 25-year sentence. She's written letters to Marcus, begging him to forgive her and help her appeal. Marcus has refused all contact. She's written to Grandma, apologizing and claiming she was mentally ill during the poisoning. Grandma has not responded. There is no forgiveness for trying to murder someone for money. I think about how close Melissa came to getting away with it. If I hadn't been an ICU nurse, I might not have recognized the signs of insulin poisoning. If I hadn't installed cameras, I wouldn't have caught the injection motions. If I hadn't known to test for C-peptide during an episode, I wouldn't have gotten the definitive medical proof. Melissa's plan was actually quite sophisticated and would have worked on most families. The only reason she failed is because she tried to murder the grandmother of someone who had the exact medical expertise needed to catch her. Some people ask if 25 years is too harsh for attempted murder since Grandma survived. Those people don't understand that Melissa poisoned a 94-year-old woman 6 times over 6 weeks. Each episode could have killed Grandma. Hypoglycemia can cause fatal seizures or cardiac arrest or irreversible brain damage. Melissa was willing to let Grandma suffer and die in the most frightening way to get money faster. That deserves the maximum sentence. I have no sympathy for Melissa. She made calculated choices to commit murder. She researched insulin poisoning. She obtained insulin illegally. She kept detailed records of her poisoning schedule. She continued even after Grandma was hospitalized multiple times in severe distress. She showed no empathy or remorse until she was caught. She deserves every single year of that 25-year sentence. Grandma Rose changed her will after the trial. She split her estate equally among her 4 children as before, but added a provision that if any heir is convicted of a crime against her or attempts to harm her, they are completely disinherited. She also added me as co-executor, along with my father, to ensure the estate is handled properly. Grandma told me privately that she trusts me completely because I saved her life and I have the integrity to honor her wishes. I visit Grandma every Sunday still. We have lunch together and talk about everything. She's remarkable. She recovered from the trauma of being poisoned by her own grandson's wife. She doesn't live in fear. She says she's grateful the truth came out and that Melissa is in prison where she belongs. Grandma's strength and resilience at 95 years old is inspiring. Every day, Melissa sits in prison. She knows it's because she tried to poison an ICU nurse's grandmother. She gambled that no one would figure out her insulin poisoning scheme. She lost that gamble because I had the medical knowledge to recognize what was happening and the determination to prove it. She thought she was clever, but she wasn't nearly as clever as she needed to be to get away with poisoning someone in a family with a critical care nurse. This is my story. I'm Sarah Chen. I'm 38 years old. I'm an ICU nurse with 16 years of experience. My sister-in-law, Melissa, poisoned my 94-year-old grandmother, Rose, with insulin injections 6 times over 6 weeks to speed up her death and inherit money faster. She caused Grandma to suffer 6 life-threatening hypoglycemic episodes. I recognized the pattern because of my medical training. I installed cameras and caught her making injections on video. I drew blood during an episode and proved external insulin administration. I worked with police and prosecutors to build an unbeatable case. Melissa was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. She will never get 1 penny of inheritance. Grandma survived and is thriving at 95. Justice was served completely, and Melissa will regret her evil choices for the rest of her life.